Hey guys, Jesse from Mountain Motorsports here. We're doing a little bit of work on my 2005 Honda Foreman TRX500FM. Just getting it ready for the upcoming hunting, camping, quadding season. I want to make sure that it's going to be reliable. We're not going to have any breakdowns in the bush this year. Yeah, basically just give it a spring check over, even though we're about a week into summer here. So we're going to start off, actually just ignore the fact that I've got half the quad torn apart right now. I've got a few other jobs that we're working on, but today we're specifically looking at the front end on this quad. We've got it jacked up in the air. One of the things that you should be checking out every spring before you go out, take your quad out, and this will work for your car as well, is you just want to check your front end, check to see if there's any play. So on this particular one, what we're going to do is we're going to grab the wheel, we're going to move it up and down, and we can see we've actually got quite a bit of play up and down in this. We're going to move it back and forth and see if we've got any play here. Here we don't. This is checking our tie rod ends, moving it back and forth here. I replaced the tie rods last year with some heavy duty tie rods, but moving up and down is going to check our ball joints. It's also going to check our wheel bearing. So what we should see, we'll take a quick look at the other side because I've already gone through this side. If we're moving up and down on this side, nothing. We've got no play, no clunking, back and forth obviously. Nice and tight there. So that's what we want to see versus what we've got. So what we're going to do, we got Big James behind the camera here taking a video. James is going to get right down in here. We're going to take a look at this axle and see the movement of the axle, see the movement of the ball joints, and see where we've got that play. So we're moving here. You can actually see that movement in the axle. We don't have any play in the ball joints by the look of it. I got the castle nut off this bottom one. I just had to steel it yesterday to do that side. But we definitely got quite a bit of play in that wheel bearing there. So that's what we're going to address. One of the other things you should be checking too is your axles, and we have a problem with this axle here. I've noticed a little bit of crunching and popping. One thing you can do is give your axle a bit of a shake. Your axle should not be moving like that. So we've got a broken axle on this side. So without further ado, we're going to start tearing into this. Let's see what we've got. Obviously start by pulling your wheel off. We're going to have to get our caliper off, but one of the things that we can notice, we can double check to see if that play is in our wheel bearing. We're just going to move this here, and we've definitely got that play. We can see it moving the axle shaft. We can see that the play is definitely right in that wheel bearing here. So what we're going to do, I'm going to replace the complete hub assembly. I have replaced just the wheel bearings in the past with some aftermarket wheel bearings. They obviously didn't last. They didn't hold up very well. I think that we may have some play in the actual bearing housing. So we're going to replace that complete hub. I've got a complete hub from Honda. We're looking at about, I believe it was about $124 Canadian. For anyone that's watching from the US, our pricing is going to be probably ridiculous to you. And I also picked up an all balls 6 bearing heavy duty axle to replace this axle with. And I believe that was somewhere in around $160. I would have to double check. If I can put a link in, I will put a link in so you guys can see exactly what that costs. So we're going to start. We're going to pull this caliper off. We're going to pull off the rotor and the hub mounting assembly. We'll pull our tie rod ends off, pull our ball joints out, and we're going to pull that hub assembly off. So let's get after it here. So we're going to pull off caliper first. start with the bottom bolt. That way when we take the top bolt off and we try to loosen the bottom one, this doesn't pull out. We don't put any extra strain on this brake line here. Little plastic cover's actually in the way a little bit. I think I'm going to pull that off first, so I'm not struggling with it. There we go. Get that out of the way. All right. Let's get back to pulling this caliper off. Take a quick look at our brake pads while we're in here. See how much wear we have. So we're just looking at the friction material here. Should be enough to get me through at least the rest of the season. So I'm not going to replace those right away, but it's good to know that we've still got some material. Take a little bungee cord here. I'm just going to hang this caliper up here so that's out of our way, and so we don't put too much strain on that flex line like I was talking about earlier. I'm going to pop these brake pads off. Just note the orientation of the brake pads. This one has a little squealer. That's the indicator to tell you when your brake pads are worn out. This little piece of metal will actually rub against that rotor. That'll squeal, giving you a little bit of noise, telling you that you need to replace your brake pads, just like you have in your car. All right. So next we're going to pull off this mounting assembly here. Alright, so next, we get the rotor hub assembly off of here. So we've just got a cotter pin in. Just going to bend the cotter pin so it's nice and straight, so we can fit it through the top here. Fish that through. That. That axle bolt loose, and this hub should just pop right off. We're good to go. Give that rotor a quick inspection. No scoring, no major damage there, so that looks good. I'll put that off to the side for now. Next, okay, we can pull off. We're going to pull off this tie rod end next. Same thing, we're going to get this cotter pin out of here. See, the cotter pin's not actually sitting in the castle nuts. These castle nuts that came with this are not quite long enough. Not the greatest design for these tie rod ends, but they're nice and tight, and at least the cotter pin will keep the nut from coming completely off out in the bush. I'm just going to hit this with an impact. I find the impact keeps the ball from spinning in here, but you can also get on there with a wrench if you need. Perfect. Came out. That tie rod actually popped right out nicely. Get that off to the side. I've already got the castle nut off on the bottom here, which is pretty easy. Same thing, pull the cotter pin, pull the castle nut off. This one up here is a little bit trickier because you do have the axle in the way. So what we're going to do, just like the other one, we're going to get this cotter pin out of there. Like I said, the clearance here isn't great, but you can get onto it. Just like that. Pull that out of there. That's a 17 mil. Once you've got it cracked loose, this one's going to come off nice by hand. If it doesn't come off nice by hand, having one of these ratcheting wrenches that you can slip in there just to loosen it off, that goes a long way. Definitely really handy to have. So I'm going to get that off there. Castle nut off to the side. Okay, so all we need to do is just break this loose. They've been pulled in so tight, these ball joints, they wedge themselves into this hub. So we're going to give the hub a bit of a whack. We're going to give this lower A-arm a bit of a whack with a hammer, see if we can't get them to break loose. And then we should be able to just pull that right out. All right. So I'm going to grab my pry bar. Because the suspension's pushing this all down, it might help to pry up while you're giving it a little bit of a whack. So let's pry this up. There we go, just like that. So there's the lower. Now we've got to get this upper one out of here. Same thing, we're just going to give a few whacks in there until it comes loose. And then we can pull that hub off of there and pull this axle out. Start putting it back together. Beauty. That's what we want to see. Okay, out with the old. Let's get this axle that we've got. Obviously, that's not very good. Before we pull this axle, what I'm actually going to do is drain the fluid out of the front differential. That way we're not spilling fluid out the seal side, and we'll replace that fluid at the same time while we're in here. So we're going to drain, I've got skid plates on this quad, but there is a hole to drain the front diff, so we're going to just get on that drain bolt, bust that loose, and like I said, replacing that diff fluid, probably a good idea. I think it's been a couple of years since I've replaced it. And this will also keep things a little bit cleaner when we pull that axle out. We won't have that fluid's not too bad. But we'll put some nice fresh gear oil in there. Make sure that that's replaced for the season. We'll replace both the gear oil front and rear in this. We'll replace the engine oil. She'll be good to go for the year. All right. We're just going to let that drain as we get going with the rest of this project. Okay, so next thing we're going to do, we're going to pull this axle out of here. It might help to have a bit of a pry bar. You might have to give it a little bit of a pry. There's a circlip that holds it in place, and that's it. There's no bolts or anything. This might take a little bit of messing around to get it out. We will. Tough to get a good angle with these skid plates on here. We might. I'll just pause that. What I'm gonna probably go. Okay, guys. So we're just gonna get back in here again with this pry bar here. Give it a couple of good whacks. There you go. So It's this right here, that little circlip. That's all that really holds that in place. So that circlip. So you basically just want to get that popped loose. And take a quick look at this seal. Clean it up a little bit. See how it looks. It doesn't look too bad. We can't always replace that down the road, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to replace it while you've got this apart. So let's get into some of these new parts here. See what we got. See what the difference is going to be. This compared to the new one. Here's our new 6-ball, all balls, heavy duty axle. 1-year warranty on it. Hopefully it lasts a little bit longer than that, but I'm not going to be plowing snow with this quad again since we don't live out on the acreage. So we can see this is the joint that we were having problems with. This moves nicely this way, but I can't pull it in and out. Whereas this one should not be doing that. So we've definitely got something busted in here. Very curious to see what's going on inside of there. I'm gonna cut that open and we'll see what kind of damage we did. Maybe I'll make a second video for that though. This one's probably gonna run a little long. Let's pop this new axle in, and on that, I'm gonna grab a new hub from Honda. Nice and new, looks like I cut myself. Okay, so one of the things we're gonna do once we get this in, let's pop that in first. Might have to kind of jiggle it around until you get all the good to go. All right, well, it took a little bit of struggling, but we did get that to finally line up and pop in. You basically just need to jiggle it around until you get those splines lined up and push it in. That circlip will compress itself, and then once it's clipped in, it will lock itself into place. We're locked in there. One thing I do like about some of the aftermarket stuff, it comes with all the hardware you need. It's one thing I wish the dealers would get in the habit of doing. That castle nut's missing. That's why I was missing the castle nut here. Castle nut on that side, when I pulled it apart, was damaged, so I stole that. So I am going to have to get a new castle nut for this. Unfortunately, I won't be able to finish this perfectly today, but we'll put a nut on there temporarily. You can see the improvement once this is all back together. So one thing I would recommend, guys, this is some spline grease. Just apply a little bit of spline grease to your splines here. So keep everything from wearing out. You can get this stuff at pretty much any automotive store, whether it's your Napa or Auto Value or Canadian Tire up here. You won't find it in a little container like this. This is some stuff I get from work, but they will be able to get you some grease that will work. You can use other kinds of grease. I find this stuff works really, really well. It just keeps the splines from wearing out over time. All right, so let's see about getting this back in to place here. Pop this in, put that in, look at that. Nice and new. So, get some of these castle nuts back on here. Said this one's a little bit tight. Not a ton of clearance on there. I'm going to get that ratcheting wrench I spoke about earlier. on there, just so we can get this be a little easier on this side. Snug it up. Get the box end wrench on there, nice and tight. So one thing we're going to want to do, line this castle nut up with the holes on the ball joint if we can. Might be a little tough to see. Let's see in the back here. Come on. Okay, so we're lined up this hole in the back. So slide that in there. Bend that down into place. Some of the dog fur out of my way here. Stuff seems to get everywhere. Usually I put the castle nut on the bottom. I'm going to grab a nut, a locking nut out of my my hardware to replace that before we're done here. But we'll put this tie rod end on next. Just going to hit that with the impact. Get her on. Nice and tight. Okay, so just reverse everything that we've already done. Let's put the backing plate on. Good to go. All right, we're back. So I did end up replacing that castle nut on the bottom of that lower ball joint. So we're all good to go. Everything's back together here. We're going to start reassembling the brakes. Actually, before we do that, let's get our hub back on here. Make sure that our hub's nice and clean, no issues there, no debris. Slide that over the axle, just like so. We need to actually tighten that down to pull it all together. So toss our axle nut on there, and use our impact, but we're not going to crank it right down with the impact, because we do want to torque this to the proper spec. We're just going to use that. Nice and snug for now. See, look at that, no more play in that bearing. Fantastic. And of course the new axle, it's not moving around like the old one, the old busted axle was. That's golden. Alright, so we can put our pad mounting bracket back on here. One thing we're going to do before we put that on, we're just going to service this up. So underneath these little rubber areas, or this little rubber area, we've got a little slider pin in here. It's actually not too bad, but sometimes you'll get some corrosion in there. So we're just going to apply a little bit of lube on there. You can get slider lube at any auto parts store. A little dab will do ya. Just gonna apply some there. Pop that back in. Make sure that that rubber boot is seated. That slides nicely. Next thing we're going to do, take a little bit of anti-seize. I've cleaned this area up where the pads slide. We're just going to apply a little bit of anti-seize on there so that the pads can slide nicely on the bracket. Just a little coating there. Here. Flip it over, do the other side. Just make sure that your pads have something nice to slide on. They're not going to get hung up. We'll grab our mounting bolts and slide up. Alright, so remember, as I said before, slider or our squealer pad is going to go in the back. This one without the squealer goes in the front. And before we put this caliper back on, we've got one more slider that's actually mounted in the caliper on this unit. I'm going to pop that out. Do the same thing with that. Just going to apply a little bit of lube. Make sure that that keeps sliding, doesn't end up getting seized up on us over the next season. So just peel this over up the boot back. Pop it off on this side as well. Out. It's a little bit grimier, so we're just going to run a little scouring pad over that, clean up some of this grime. This is the kind of stuff that'll get your brake pads to hang up. You'll end up wearing your brake pads out abnormally, so clean that up real quick. There we go. A lot better than she was. Same as before, we're just going to put a dab of lube on here. Make sure everything's lubed up nicely. We'll get rid of that. Slide that back on. There you go. Make sure that the rubber boot's seated properly, slides nicely, and we can put that caliper back on. If the caliper doesn't slide back on properly, you might have to just compress that piston in there a little bit. You can see I can just do it by hand on this. With a car or a truck, anything bigger than this, you might actually need a tool to compress it. These little quad calipers, they move pretty easily though. Just going to slide that over. Put our retaining bolts back in. Alright, it's pretty much all back together now. What we want to do is actually torque this nut, make sure that that's properly torqued to spec. We can put the wheel back on, we can put some oil back into our diff, and yeah, front end should... So we're going to torque this nut. Spec should be 58 foot-pounds. Good. Put our cotter pin back in. I'm going to bend that out front and clip off this bottom one. Alright, good to go. Let's toss this wheel back on here and see how much of a difference that made. I'm going to torque these back down to 47 foot-pounds because that's spec, but I just wanted to toss it on here so you guys can see. So let's take a look. Oh, look at that. Nice and tight. No play. Feeling pretty good. Okay, so we're going to put some diff fluid in and should be good to go. Alright guys, thank you very much for watching my video. Last but not least, I just want to take a look at this old axle. And we'll see what kind of carnage we had going on in there, because we did have some good clicking, crunching, popping. It was hard to push around the garage. So I've already cut the clamps off the end of the side that's busted here. Just going to pull this out and take a look. Obviously there's lots of grease. We do have some nice debris in there. Oh, look at this stuff. I'm going to make a mess of my bench here, but yeah, we've got a little bit of bearing cage in there by the look of it. There's one of the bearings, some more bearing cage there, more bearing cage there. So obviously we broke the bearing cage on this. And this is where those balls ride. More bearing cage, more bearing cage. Yeah, we just destroyed this one, a good one.